Annika Smethurst is News Corp's best journalist. She's also found herself in that, I might say, unenviable position of not just writing the news and analysing the news, but being the news, which creates extraordinary stress. I've seen at the ABC what it's done to two of my former colleagues, and it's tough. The fact that she's kept going and not even once visibly flinched has been, I might say, absolutely stellar. And we are very lucky to have her, and of course she's a local as well. And you can enjoy her as you might have this Sunday morning on ABC TV's excellent Insiders program with the excellent David Spears now in the chair.
I actually didn't prepare any notes because I think these things work better as a conversation, but I'm happy to, I guess, give you a rundown of why I'm here. If you lived under a rock for the last year, you might not know. I work in Canberra at in the press gallery. I'm the political editor for the Sunday News Corp newspapers. As John said, I am a Bendigo girl. I went to school here and I worked at the Bendigo Weekly before moving to Melbourne and working at the Herald Sun. A couple of years ago now, I wrote a story which I really didn't think got that much attention at the time, and I was a bit disappointed with, given how much effort I'd put into getting this story. It was about a proposal that had been discussed at very high levels of the Home Affairs Department to change the laws of one of our spy agencies. Australians don't know a lot about our spy agencies traditionally because they act in the shadows and that's the way they like it. But we have about 6 spy agencies. 3 of them roughly look at foreign threats, 3 of them look at local threats such as ASIO. They investigate us. Our cyber spies at the ASD wanted the power to start looking on us, and that meant reading our text messages, looking at our bank statements, and being able to do so perhaps without a warrant, just with the tick off from a minister. I became aware of this. This wasn't a popular decision. In fact, the Prime Minister at the time, Malcolm Turnbull, wasn't even in favour of it, but didn't know that this was being discussed in Home Affairs, and we wrote that story. And it was pretty hard to follow. I wrote it on a Sunday and Monday came around and there was a little bit in the paper, but everybody just moved on. And I was kind of upset about that, but moved on too. Until June 4 last year, when 7 police showed up at my house and decided they wanted to raid my property to find information about the story. And since then, they haven't ruled out me being prosecuted and going to jail. And we have gone to the High Court to challenge the validity of that warrant, which will be discussed because of the ABC decision today, and we're still waiting. We think it'll maybe be another 4 to 6 weeks before we get a result, and that investigation can move on. But as John said, it creates a huge amount of stress. I don't care really in many ways because I don't think it deters journalists, and it hasn't stopped me wanting to write stories. But I think it has a really chilling effect on whistleblowers and potentially more people coming through who see wrongdoing and deciding now not to come forward, which is a real challenge and is a real challenge for journalism. So I think journalists are quite a bolshy bunch, and I don't know too many that have been too scared by what's happened in a sense that they wouldn't write a good story if it came across their desk. But those stories are less likely to come across their desk if this is the path we go down, and I think that's really damaging. So hopefully we can talk a bit more about that tonight.
Annika, if I can cross-examine you first, if you could swear on your the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I'll say whatever my lawyers let me say, but yes, I'm happy to answer your questions, John.
And I do understand and respect the fact that there undoubtedly are things that you're withholding for the purpose of defending yourself in case proceedings are issued against you. And I again say I have no idea how you carry that stress and burden, and congratulations to you. What was the reaction from your editor and publishers when they found out that your story was getting them too, as well as you, into such hot water?
They were, as supportive as they can be, and I think the thing that's lost in all of this is that when I did go and initially pitch this story, we don't just sort of write stories and send them in, and these are things that are discussed at weeks and months ahead sometimes. And we knew there was an inherent risk in publishing this story. You get legal advice, as you know, as a lawyer. you get a lot of different legal advice, a lot of conflicting legal advice. On the day we decided to publish what appeared to be the top of a government document, whether it was or not is still up for debate, but that was sort of the decisions you make in the course of the moment that can, have huge effects in this. And the case that they didn't raid my workplace. It's been well reported that on day 3, after raiding my house and then the ABC, they did have a warrant to go to my workplace, and there's been a lot of sort of conspiracy theories about why that didn't happen. I can tell you it was a cock-up over a conspiracy. They knew their warrant was probably was going to be challenged and probably wasn't up to scratch. And my workplace is, of course, Parliament House, and to come into Parliament House, they would have had to get approval from the Speaker and the President, and that put the government in a pretty dodgy situation. It has happened before with the NBN raids, but they try not to do that, so that's why they came to my home. Now, I might be the one that would, is talked about going to jail, but as you say, my editors would be on the hook for this too. And they make those decisions every day. There are currently at News Corp 10 journalists that it hasn't been ruled out that they would go to jail for different things. I'm probably the most public one because there was a raid at my home, but there are other proceedings bubbling along and a lot of editors on the hook for this, and that's a decision they live with every day as editors of newspapers.
Annika, has anyone pointed out to the Federal Police that they raided the ABC Sydney headquarters even though both the journalists they were investigating work out of Melbourne?
I don't know, I did speak to Sam Clark, one of them, yesterday, and we have joked about this before. The alarming thing was too, they had to get swipe-in cards, so they had to tell them they were coming, whereas to get into my house they didn't need a swipe card. So the one at the ABC was a little bit more organised, but I guess it's the power once they get in and onto that computer system, how much they can take. And they haven't come to News Corp yet to raid myself or my colleagues at a work sense, but that warrant still exists, and they have stopped the investigation while we're challenging my warrant. And that could sort of see what they do. But once they get into those computer systems, it's not just, and I sort of say this was what they've taken off my phone, it's not just that one story. I have on my phone the phone numbers of a lot of politicians and a lot of staffers and sources who text me about a range of things and personal communications, and the amount of information those police were able to see when they went into the ABC is terrifying.
Annika, have sources dried up? Because you said before, your editors and publishers have backed you all the way, and they've certainly expended a lot of energy and spent a lot of actual cash so far on very highly paid QCs whose kids are getting all their orthodontic bills paid for out of Rupert Murdoch's pocket. That's wonderful. But have sources dried up? Have people been deterred from passing on information to you? Initially,
100%. I continued to try and work for a little bit last year and was like, this isn't going to affect what I do. That's, they'll win if I stop doing this. But I found it particularly hard. And I had a conversation with a former News Corp journalist, Jared Henderson, who just escaped a jail conviction about 10 years ago for an innocuous story about changes to Veterans Affairs payments, which nearly landed him in jail because he refused to reveal, it was him and Michael Harvey, refused to reveal a source, and he's now a political staffer and has been a source of strength for me. But he said to me, I found that everybody was very pleasant to me and smiled and asked how I was, but sources dried up. And to start with, yes, I spoke to a number of ministers who said I don't want to talk on the phone, and we've since found out, we knew my phone was being bugged, but they released a report last year saying 6 journalists have had their phone bugged in the last year, so you can probably guess who that is. Me, a couple of my editors, Sam Clark, Dan from ABC. So it was...
Do you think your phone is still bugged?
100%. And
have you got a burner?
They'll just chase it, so I don't...
People know what a burner phone is? It's where you go and buy a
old Nokia phone or
people
something.
Can't track it down.
We just think anything on the phone now is not sort of, so I don't have those high-level conversations. I moved house because we thought my house might be bugged, and also that they can potentially record even then when it's sitting...
Yeah, they can be eavesdropping on us right now through our phones. Are people aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah, good.
So even if I have a serious conversation, I leave my phone at home and go for a walk in a park or to a fountain or something like that.
Your phone can be turned off and it can still be used for someone to access your conversation remotely.
Yeah.
So you do occasionally, I've had this experience too, where someone says, leave your phone at home and we'll go for a walk, take the dog down the park without the phone so that we can have a conversation knowing that it's not being in any way...
Infamously, Sam Dastiari warned someone about that and got caught out doing it because he may have known that a phone was being bugged. But yes, they can be that. So, look, a lot of that can't be used, and if it came up in court, it would be an interesting sort of thing. But it has, of course, dried up sources. I think 6 months down the track, the benefit I have is working in Parliament House, so I just go and knock on doors of offices. Our offices are in Parliament House, like the ministers and the MPs, so I can have a lot of face-to-face conversations, but it has taken a lot of effort for people to trust me again, just knowing that, the AFP have access to everything that they send me.
The great irony, of course, is that sometimes the most damaging material about any government is often provided to journalists by people who are supposedly part of that government. Just those who aren't actually in the position they feel that they ought be in within the government. So the idea that it's all, the enemy, well, it comes down to how you define the enemy. It's very short-sighted because, of course, the other thing is that inevitably the people who are the government at the moment one day will be the opposition.
Having said that, Labor, when this leak came out, Mark Dreyfus within 24 hours wrote to Malcolm Turnbull and said, I think you should investigate this. So they're being very supportive now, but no government likes leaks because, as you say, when they become the government or the opposition, they don't want to deal with that either. But there is a big contrast. The one that comes up with me is often the Medivac leak. There was a leak on the front of the Australian newspaper, which has been guessed that it perhaps came from Home Affairs, Peter Dutton's office, somebody within that realm. I don't know where it came from, but it hadn't been seen by many people outside of that scope, and it was advantageous to the government, and it sort of backed in their view on the Medivac legislation. There was no raids about that, and cabinet leaks are the things political journalists want the most, and they happen rarely. But there does seem to be quite a different view about who gets investigated and who doesn't. And I was speaking to Laurie Oakes he got a lot of cabinet leaks in his time, but one of them he got was about Kevin Rudd's fuel watch system, which a lot of people disagreed with, but Kevin Rudd went ahead with anyway, and he'd had advice that it wasn't perhaps going to achieve what he wanted to achieve. And the head of the AFP rang Laurie Oakes and said, now, do you still have the document that you revealed in the paper? And he said, no, I don't. And I said, because Laurie, if you do, we'd have to, come over and search your house. And he just said it doesn't exist anymore. And that's how it used to operate too. You'd write something and the
old school
would ring up and say, Annika, do you have that document? And I'd say, what document? And they would have been seen as doing their work. I would have been seen as cooperating in a certain level, and we'd all move on. But the extent of time and effort and money going into my case is absurd.
What do you think's changed, Annika, in that sense? If that's how it used to be done, what has changed and why, do you think?
I'm not sure, because speaking to people at the AFP, I think they're sick of being used as a political tool. I don't think anybody signs
They say that to you off the record or in a conversation in the park with no one having a phone with them.
Yeah, look, even the people who came to my house, outside of maybe the two more senior police who were there, I think they felt very uncomfortable going through my property. I don't think they sign up to the AFP to search journos. They want to go after pedophiles or drug dealers or terrorists. And they don't want to be involved in political games, but they have to be seen once they get a referral to do this. I don't think there is an appetite for it within the actual police. It's the people above them that do it.
Annika, you started out working here in Bendigo on a regional newspaper. We've very much focused on the national scene and big picture issues. What's the effect of this suppression of free speech, though, at the local and regional level? Because the same principles apply, but regional media have nothing like the checkbooks available to them that your employers have.
Yeah, I think it's even harder. And News Corp may have deep pockets, but it's the amount of money that, as you would know as a lawyer, we're spending on this is incredible. And
about how much? Are you allowed to tell us?
I once saw something that came across my desk I had to sign about the hourly rate for the lawyers that we have. Look, we don't know where it's up to, but I think we were sort of, thinking it would be somewhere around $500,000. The government probably have spent more and whoever loses will have to pay damages for the other side. So,
And costs, and you're worth every cent, I might say too.
so it is incredible the amount of, and this is taxpayer money on the AFP side. If they lose, it'll be interesting to see sort of, if they keep going with this investigation, because it becomes a very hard political argument to sell to say we're spending millions of dollars chasing me, not terrorists, but if they want to do that, that's fine. We buy ink by the barrel, so good luck to them. But I think, your point about regionally, journalism regionally is hard for so many reasons, and that's just one of them. But the resources, trying to be a journalist in a small town when Melbourne and Canberra and Sydney are big places, and you can burn a contact and annoy somebody and move on, and it doesn't have detrimental effects. But if you do someone over in a town like this, it can mean you don't have a lot of other options. So there is enough stresses, let alone the huge financial cost, given nobody's buying newspapers anymore, and people want news to be free. Let alone the legal issues and the right to know campaign. It isn't just going to help. If we achieve anything, metropolitan papers, it'll have a flow-on effect to help out local journos too, which it should.
Investigative journalism, Annika?
Look, just in my time at the Herald Sun, I've been there about 10 years, and the number of the drop-in staff is alarming. News Corp is a very big media empire. I'm not saying we're not, but it's dropped off incredibly because there's just the money stream, people buying newspapers and advertisers advertising in our papers it's not what it used to be. We have, against the odds, just started up an investigations unit, which we haven't had for about 10 years, so that's a good thing, but it takes time, and the problem is it's cyclical. So if we have fewer journalists, we rush stories, we don't do them as well, we miss the big story to get the quick hit. Therefore our quality drops, therefore people stop buying the newspaper, therefore we have no money. So it's really hard to convince editors and those at the top of a company to invest in real investigative journalism. I'm glad we are doing it, but I don't know what the answer is to do it long term. And half of the challenge is so-called, and some of them play an important role, but citizen journalists that very often very critical of us for why don't you report this and why don't you do this, but real journalism takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and there's a lot of dead ends, and you can work on stories for ages and then they don't come off, and it's frustrating, and trying to convince people to fund that, whether the public or proprietors, is just a huge challenge.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic?
When I went through university, the first thing, on my first day there, they said, basically, I don't know why you're all here, there won't be newspapers. My textbooks predicted the demise of newspapers before 2020, and they're still going. I think it'll look different. And within the press gallery in Canberra, we had the Huffington Post for a while, they're not there. The Guardian, they don't put out a newspaper, they're all online. There's smaller voices, there's podcasts. I think news will look different, but the need for news will always be there.